These narcissists yell at everybody. And while you don't think they should be allowed to keep getting away with it, trust me when I tell you, you're not going to be the one to change this person's personality or behavior. And you can de escalate the situation if you don't engage. So let's talk about transportation rage. What made this video come to my mind, I was reading the news this morning and I was struck how much in the past few weeks the number of articles that were about air rage, road rage, customer service rage, and all kinds of pundits and journalists and consumer and customer service experts were all sitting there in these articles trying to make sense of it, and were framing it from a stress and pandemic standpoint. Now, these issues, especially the road rage and the air rage, it's a no joke. People are literally getting killed or physically harmed, and certainly are getting psychologically harmed. A few months ago, for example, here in Orange County in California, a child was shot and killed due to a road rage incident. So this isn't just somebody flipping you off on the freeway. This is dangerous. The toll also in air rage on flight attendants and publicized cases, this has resulted in real injury, and over time is resulting in significant stress for flight attendants, airline employees, and fellow passengers. Now, I don't think this is stress. I think there's something far more nefarious at play. I am willing to take the bet from anyone that these road ragers and these air ragers, this behavior of theirs, this is not a one-off. These are not people who are just so exhausted and depleted by stress and the difficulties of these past few years that they just snapped and ran someone off the road, or shot into their car window, or punched their flight attendant for being asked to mask up, or raged at a fellow passenger. Nope. These are people who are regularly abusive people who have been raging and raging for years, probably often in private at the unfortunate people who are in their lives. But then the day comes that these people have a public meltdown, and of course everyone has a camera now. But this behavior, their ragey behavior, whether in a car or on a plane or on a train or in a bus, is nothing new for them. Lots of times people try to give these folks a pass and say, they were drunk. Nah, not so much. I'm not buying that. I have no doubt that some of these folks were drunk, but it's the personality part that results in the meltdown. If everyone who was drunk, who gets on an airplane, started a fight in an airplane, no flights would ever take off again. So nobody, once again, wants to call this out for what it is. All of this public transportation rage stuff, highway transportation rage stuff, this is what happens when narcissistic patterns hit critical societal mass. And then you have everyone wringing their hands wondering, oh, what can we do? The world has become such a bad place. Here's the thing, gang, given that it's narcissism, there's not much we can do. Because one of the only things that works with people who have these kinds of high conflict, antagonistic, narcissistic personalities is meaningful, and I mean meaningful penalties, really stiff fines, lifetime no-fly stipulations, long-term loss of a driver's license, in some cases imprisonment. And for those who may have employers, it may mean employers who are empowered to be able to say, nah, we don't want someone around like this working here, and then income loss as well. Narcissistic people and their impulsive behavior is largely enabled and emboldened by the world at large because more often than not, they get away with their behavior. They get lots of second chances, or whatever penalty they get is at best a mere inconvenience. And then the narcissist will try to come back afterwards and say, oh, I didn't really mean it. I got hot-headed. Oh, the pandemic, the pressure, I'm stressed, all these new rules, whatever nonsensical excuse they come up with. I'm sorry. Nobody's pressure in life is so bad that they have to slap a passenger or hit a flight attendant or shoot into someone's car. Nobody's stress. The narcissistic folks want to have their impulsive, toddler, dangerous meltdowns. Then they're done with their little meltdown and they get their rage out and they feel just fine. And then they want everyone to conveniently forget about it. In the absence of meaningful penalties, that means they think it's okay for them to have their public meltdowns anywhere they want. It's not okay. The increasing incivility in the world is coming from lots of sources. The kind of behavior, for example, that our so called leaders and celebrities model on social media and in the public eye. The enabling of impulsive behavior by not issuing meaningful consequences and making excuses. Yes, there are certainly societal and cultural factors that are definitely not helping. Things like corporations who, even when they get government bailouts, don't use them to enhance customer service or customer experience. They just basically, these bailouts are used to line the pockets of the C-suite occupants. Federal, state, and local governments that seem to be run by performative circus clowns rather than thoughtful leaders that actually care about a citizenry. Then we have issues like income disparity, and for a lot of Americans feeling like there's no way to get ahead. But nearly all of us are living under these circumstances, and most of us aren't trying to deliver a right hook to a flight attendant or stab the person who takes our parking spot. We have been soft pedaling on narcissism as a public issue for too long. This kind of behavior that we see that people video with their phones, it's the visible top of the iceberg for the rageful, abusive people who have been destroying the lives of everyone around them for so long. Because I care so much about this issue, I have to tell you, it's a sick hobby of mine, but I'll often do a deep dive when I read one of these air rage or road rage situations, and I do the deep dive on these perpetrators because I want to learn more about them. And it's striking to me how many of the people who do these things have existing rap sheets or complaints against them, inconsistent employment histories due to bad behavior in the workplace, domestic violence charges or restraining orders, DUIs, public disorderliness. Let's face it, this isn't their first time at the rodeo. And no, it's not because they took a sleeping pill and had one too many drinks in an airport bar. These are high conflict people who make messes anywhere that their entitlement doesn't work for them, and they get very dysregulated when they are frustrated. Most 3-year-olds in a preschool classroom have higher behavioral standards placed on them than the myriad narcissists who are out there making our roads and our skies a more dangerous place. But on another related to this, we can't forget the world of customer service. This actually extends, and what I mean here is the abuses experienced by those who do work in any form of customer service out there. These are folks who are working as frontline cashiers, clerks, servers, all of them. And in the research now are reporting an escalation in bad behavior, and management unfairly puts these frontline workers in the position of having to be enforcers of rules that get people inflamed and then puts those workers in harm's way. Again, we are talking about the customers that need the manager to be called and have no problem screaming at or actually assaulting a 20-year-old kid who's working a part-time job. These people who abuse these frontline workers are always abusers. These are not lovely, graceful people living their lives who then get angry at having to wait in a grocery line and snap. These are constantly rageful people. I challenge you right now. If you were to pause this video and go online within 5 minutes, if you scrolled a news site, you will find a news story that shares one more person going after someone who's doing the thankless job of interacting with the public. Now, my focus and my work is really centrally focused on helping survivors survive these damned narcissistic relationships. I'm also not so grandiose or stupid as to think I can change the world. I don't even think I could change one person in it. I'm always glad, though, when I hear or read about real swift and severe consequences being put on air ragers, road ragers, hotel ragers, retail ragers, and every other kind of public rage out there. But for every case we hear of where it's publicized and there may be real consequences, there are thousands of others where someone is getting away with it and it'll only be worse next time. For the survivors out there, just having to witness this dysregulated narcissistic BS in public can really be quite triggering and uncomfortable, and a constant sad reminder of how toxic this world is. Anyone walking around in the world saying, "Oh, come on, Dr. RAMANI, come on, stop saying narcissism's such a big problem," I can promise you they ain't paying attention. And those who try to write these kinds of public behaviors off as a one-off drunken rant also doesn't understand narcissism. If the people making policies want to help all of us be more safe, they want to start fencing in this narcissism problem, and it is a global problem. Let's have real consequences for the impulsive, rageful, tantrum throwing people out there. No, and I'm not talking about nonsense like 10 weeks of anger management training. I'm talking about real consequences because the rest of us are having to live in a more and more dangerous world because of them. It really is time to make this stop. So next time you see someone out there publicly tantruming because someone took their parking spot or someone got ahead of them in line or they didn't like their seat on an airplane, at least you can calmly know, well, they ain't going to change. I am not engaging this. And once again, there's the narcissism in our fold. And any of you want to drop a comment. Have you witnessed these incidents or know someone who's done these things? We do know this, that really bad, dangerous driving correlated with narcissism. Big surprise, right? Anybody, any of you listening to this who has ever waited a table, worked as a cashier, been a receptionist, had to do customer service by phone, you understand narcissism actually better than most people. You may understand it better than me, but you may not have known all of this behavior had a name. Back in the day, a long time ago, I did my time in some of the worst frontline jobs you could imagine. I scooped ice cream at an amusement park. I worked at a fast food restaurant in the drive-through window. I waited tables. I've been a receptionist. I worked in a library. And I have to say, in all of these cases, the worst part of the job was the difficult person I'd have to deal with. The people who would yell if the food wasn't prepared exactly the way they wanted. The people who would talk louder because their question wasn't clear, so they thought by speaking louder I would understand them. The people who would ask me if I was stupid or slow, or my favorite, and they would always start talking louder when they said, Miss, can I speak to a manager? That was always my favorite. I thank God I was never the manager. I once had someone who would not allow me to take their order at a fast food restaurant because of my race, and other people who told me I was in America, so I should have an American name. I watched people come in with their children and model entitled behavior for their kids when they would yell at either the person taking their order or at other customers in line for taking too long. Or my favorite was the people who were saying, I'm busy, and they felt that the line doesn't apply to them. Again, if you have any of these narcissistic customer service stories, they're kind of juicy. Drop them in the comments. Now, I was fortunate. I worked all of these jobs before I got to graduate school, and goodness knows they built a very steely spine in me. But it was before I went to graduate school, so I didn't have a framework or a model for what the hell was wrong with these demanding, entitled, hypocritical, dysregulated, conflictual, nasty, mean, rageful people. I had a few obscene words for what I thought they were, but it wasn't until many, many years later that I began doing work on narcissism that the light bulb went off and I finally got it. In fact, my research in this area initially got prompted by the observations of frontline healthcare workers. For example, nurses and nursing assistants and even receptionists who were routinely being yelled at and verbally abused by difficult patients. The people in my team, we started noticing commonalities in the personality styles of these yelling patients, and thus that actually started a 10-year program of research for me on this. The ideology of this concept of the customer is always right has to be one of the most enabling, damaging phrases out there. While I appreciate that a person who is spending money in a business deserves to be treated with respect, I firmly believe that that paradigm needs to be extended. So it's not just the customer deserves respect. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, including the people who work there. Now, as you can imagine, a narcissistic customer who is hypersensitive, sometimes bordering on paranoia, who's deeply entitled, who has no regard for other people, who holds unreasonable demands and is rageful, dominating, controlling, and obviously they believe that the rules do not apply to them. This is a customer or a client who is going to berate the frontline employees or the phone employees who have no power, and then will go on to manipulate the management. And ultimately, the narcissist behavior is rewarded, because then the manager will tell that frontline employee, give them the discount, gives them the perk, gives them their money back, let them skip the line, give them whatever they want because they're being too disruptive. So what's that narcissist going to do next time? Yep, they're just going to be themselves, and they're going to get rewarded again. Watching this sequence play out over and over again with multiple customers can leave frontline customer serving employees feeling helpless, because they know they're just going to have to keep enduring these punches for a while, and then their manager will step in and then give in to the narcissist. It's painful to watch that keep unfolding every time. Difficult personalities have this sequence figured out, and honestly, I just don't think they care. They just want to get their way. And this can escalate beyond just asking for their money back. And we might even go so far as what we definitely see as a greater likelihood of litigation from people with narcissistic personalities. And they'll come in and say, yeah, you know what? I'm going to sue you. And so in the wake of just trying to avoid the exhaustion and the nightmare and the legal fees, people will either give in to them or settle with them, giving the narcissist once again the sense of they won. So they're just going to do it again. Now, we all have to own it. I'm owning it. We are all guilty of getting snippy with at least one call center employee or one customer service representative. You know how it is after you press 10 buttons and answering a bunch of questions orally, which the system then doesn't understand. So then we speak our answers louder, and now we're screaming them. And then the system says, I do not understand your response. And then the person we get may or may not understand our question. We may not understand what they're asking us. And especially if our customer service call may involve a significant amount of money, or maybe a gift, or we're tired because it involves travel, or any other situation when we're not at our best, we snap. And you know what? That's not okay. And I know I've done it, and it wasn't okay. And afterwards, I realize I am not the first person who has done this with them. These people who answer these phones at these customer service jobs are often cuffed to really tight scripts that they're not allowed to go off of because their calls are being recorded. And they may very well be working under the management or supervision of a really difficult person themselves who's pressuring them to take more calls. But we as the customers can also do better, because these phone center representatives are likely dealing with dozens of meltdowns a day, meltdowns that are taking a toll on their health. This really, though, becomes a training issue. If the call centers, restaurant managers, clinic managers, retail store managers, hotel managers, and frankly, any manager of any employer, large or small, could just understand these styles and train their employees, then there are tremendous opportunities to save a lot of grief for people who work with the public. In many ways, they can follow the guidance, the training could follow the guidance, often given to those who are having to live in narcissistic relationships, but maybe level it up a little bit. So here are some basic thoughts, especially for those of you who either manage people in customer service or work in any form of customer service employment. Anyone dealing with clients should always start with kindness and warmth. And there's a strategic reason for that. I mean, first of all, it's good customer service 101. Be kind and warm to anyone who comes into any place of business. But the other thing it lets you do is to get a pulse on the situation. If you're the clerk and you're being very warm and, hello, welcome, how can I help you today? And the person you are serving or helping is still very abrupt and very rude with you, the probability is that you are dealing with a high conflict antagonistic person. And that means you can start getting your defenses in gear. Okay? So it's a way to sort of smell out a situation. Normal people will typically receive warmth with warmth. Yeah, every so often, perhaps someone's just having a bad day. But by and large, that initial moment of greeting is powerful. Now, it becomes a bigger issue. If your frontline staffers are abrupt and rude, then the reaction of the customer or the client may in fact be a byproduct of the rude treatment, not because the client is a difficult person. That's why that frontline warmth becomes so important. If after a warm greeting, a client is clipped, cold, dismissive, harsh, difficult, or verbally abusive, then you can snap over to the difficult person plan. You can have your staff remain warmish, but bring that down a little bit, and then robotically just stick to the facts. Focus on efficiency and getting things done smoothly. Ensure that your employees document and be mindful of every step, because that's going to be your only defense down the road with these darn litigious narcissistic people. Have a protocol whereby a frontline worker can quickly beckon someone else over, subtly, to bear witness. The narcissist actually may be a little less likely to act out if they think there are other eyes on the situation. And then you also have a second person present to help diffuse. In most cases, this may actually get the transaction or complaint handled smoothly. If even despite doing all of this, the narcissistic customer escalates, you keep your voice calm. Something I term the hostage negotiator voice. Yes, sir, yeah. I hear that you're frustrated that the part is not in stock despite being told it was. I'm definitely going to try to find a way to rectify this as soon as possible. But I just need a minute. I drove an hour. I drove an hour to get this part. You know what? Obscene you, F you, this you. You, as the clerk, stay calm. You take a deep breath. And you don't make the rookie mistake of getting into it with them. Do not engage, do not defend, do not explain, do not personalize. These narcissists yell at everybody. And while you don't think they should be allowed to keep getting away with it, trust me when I tell you, you're not going to be the one to change this person's personality or behavior. And you can de-escalate the situation if you don't engage. Then step away, bring in those who are empowered to make decisions, and you step out. You ain't getting paid enough to deal with this. And so many times, people get into the mud. Frontline workers get into the mud with narcissists. Maybe because they want to let out steam by taking the fight. But those of you in management, train your staff to not take the fight, but support them with these customers. After this happens to your staff, the frontline worker is going to need a break. And in management, you need to start building in these breaks for staff. Call them toxic people breaks. The bandwidth of frontline workers is so depleted after these experiences, and putting them back on the floor is a mistake. Give them a break, let them replete their bandwidth, respect them, and let them breathe through it. Be aware of the amount of harm it causes an employee to be in the face of this kind of verbal abuse, especially somebody that is working for a minimum wage and has little power. These experiences for someone being screamed at by a rageful customer can be activating, triggering, and re-traumatizing. You have to understand that. And management needs to train employees regularly on this and keep having ongoing trainings. Otherwise, it is too psychically exhausting for your staff to watch the narcissist just get enabled and keep getting away with it. Learn to identify this pattern early in your clients. Give your employees tools to handle it and cut your staff some slack. If you are someone who works in customer service, at a minimum, I want to validate your experience. This is rough, and it is a really rough time when people are behaving, it seems, worse than ever to be in customer service of any kind, and you're often powerless to do much. Keep in mind that we are in some really, really bleak times when some of this behavior by narcissistic, difficult people is downright dangerous. Companies have to protect their frontline employees. And if that means using security, then same rule. You need to make sure your security people understand how to handle high conflict people, because a lot of them don't. Now, let's turn it around a little. You may be wondering, what if it is the frontline employee themselves, the clerk, the cashier, whomever, the service rep, is the toxic one? Once again, remember the golden rule. Don't be reactive. You, as a customer, can sometimes take business elsewhere, but let's say it's a business that is handling something that you can only do in that particular facility. For example, like a governmental office, like a DMV, or a doctor's office where you get your care and you have to go there. Then as the customer or the patient or the client, you need to stay calm. Keep your eye on the goal of getting it done, and calmly find a way if you want to inform someone of your experience. Don't yell at them, okay? Bottom line is that yelling at anyone is never okay, and frontline workers typically get some of the worst of it. Narcissistic, difficult, rageful people do this to everyone, and they tend to double down on abusing people who have less power than them or who are in service to them, because it gives the narcissist's fragile egos a chance to flex some muscle. If anyone out there working in customer service can understand one thing, is that you need to understand that the yellers are just actually deeply insecure people who live their lives in fear of being found out and feeling ashamed. Really, those yelly customers are just like emotionally stunted as a 3-year-old. And then if you in your head can imagine that the person who's yelling at you is actually standing there as all of 3 feet tall in their little footy pajamas, holding a blanket and yelling at you, "I don't want to wait in this line." It's a good visual. And it may allow you to stay calm. Listen, you're not going to stop dropping F-bombs on a 3-year-old, are you? Then you can quietly get your manager and step out of the situation. Customer service in an era of narcissism is all about de-escalation, but not necessarily pandering. It sucks to watch narcissists get enabled, but you ain't going to change them. Your manager ain't going to change them. Nobody is. But I do acknowledge, and I see it happen all the time. I've seen it happen more than a few times. Whether it's at a retail department store or grocery store, which are pretty much the only stores I go to, that I will see someone just start yelling like, "You said it. This was on my receipt. This was on my receipt. Why aren't you honoring this?" And on and on and on. But when you see it, these customers, these difficult customers, are so reactive. It's so clear to me. They're like this with everyone. And what's so interesting, me being the narcissism researcher I am, I will then sometimes watch the whole thing play out. And then if my timing is such that I leave the shop at the same time and then get to the parking lot, you'll often see them with their cart, and then smash the cart in, and then they'll go to the parking lot, and then they'll screech out. And then you'll see them actually go. I remember this recently, and I watched someone who had one of these meltdowns in a local store. Again, narcissism researcher. I was geeking out and trying to see what this person would do. And so it got to the parking lot, happened to be at the same time as this person, and they screech out of the lot, screech, and then they go, and then they get to the first intersection, and then they're darting and weaving out of traffic, and then they went off into the sunset. And it dawned on me, this person is just a human wrecking crew, and that's the nature of these high conflict, toxic, antagonistic personalities. They just leave a wake of broken souls everywhere they go. The people they cut off in traffic, the people they were honking at, and God help the people they were going home to. So those of you who are working in frontline customer service, hold on to that. That tantruming 3-year-old in their pajamas who's yelling and screaming and, I want my discount. And when you can do it like that, you can almost sort of smile a little bit and say, you know what, just hold that thought. I'm going to get the manager. So good luck to you. I've been there, trust me. I've done my hard yards. and I get it. And I've screwed up a couple of times and not been as good to customer service people as I wanted. I actually once drove back to the store to apologize. We can all do better, and let's start. Have you ever been in sort of a tense conversation or argument with a narcissistic person, and during that conversation or argument, they threw something? If you did, drop it in the comments. I don't necessarily mean they threw it at you. They just threw something, right? So I guess in this video, I'm asking a question. Why do toxic people throw stuff? I don't mean good throwing, like throwing a ball. I mean throwing objects like a phone or a plate, a remote, even a pillow or a coat, whatever else is close, throwing it down. They don't even necessarily need to throw it at someone. It's the act of the throwing. This question initially started churning for me when we had a couple of guests in a row on the podcast who were actually talking about workplace abuse stuff. They were talking about toxic bosses throwing stuff. Sometimes they were throwing stuff at people, sometimes not, and never in a way that harmed the other people physically. So sometimes like throwing a sandwich kind of thing. Now, I think these days, if you did throw something at work out of anger, I think things have probably tightened up where you'd get into trouble. Maybe not. I don't know where you work. Now, remember, I'm not talking about like the throwing aside of something that is broken when it's appropriate to sort of toss it out. Like at a building site, someone might be throwing like pieces of wood down or, throwing stuff across the room to get it into the trash. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about rageful throwing. Like this is the throwing something at a time of anger. And I gotta say, it's increasingly seeming to be sort of a signature toxic person move. Now, there is some debate out there actually on whether throwing stuff qualifies as domestic or relational violence. The general gist is that if it's thrown in rage, or certainly if it's thrown at someone, in most jurisdictions it qualifies. And to me, throwing stuff out of anger is one of those canary in the coal mine behaviors. It's showing us that a thrower is incapable of controlling their rage. They can't breathe, they can't regulate, count down, walk, or do the other things that we should be doing when we're overwhelmed with frustration or strong emotion. The throwing then is often a gateway behavior, which could escalate into more harmful behaviors. It's just likely a matter of time in most cases that throwing of a thing, even if it's aside, could be a throwing it at you or worse. But the throwing, again, it's a thing in these narcissistic toxic folks, and it's a form of acting out that can easily be gaslighted about, especially if the throwing is of something sort of soft or light and non-harming, like a pillow, or the thing isn't being thrown at you, but on the ground or at the wall or something like that. It's not uncommon then for the toxic thrower to take the stance of, oh, stop being so dramatic. So I threw something. It's not like I threw it at you. Stop making such a big deal out of it. And now you feel like the crazy person who is unsettled by something being thrown and being told you're too sensitive, and you know the rest of that story. In my years of clinical practice working with clients who were in antagonistic or narcissistic relationships, throwing came up a lot. Not hitting or other assaultive behaviors nearly as much as throwing. In many cases, the person in the session was telling me about it and would even sometimes say, well, I guess I kind of feel a little bit lucky that they were just throwing stuff and not hitting me. I don't think that's lucky. And of course, obviously, that's part of the rationalization system that people in these relationships find themselves in. Throwing is never okay. It's not lucky. You are with someone who cannot manage themselves when they are in a strong, emotional, angry interaction with you, and then they throw something. Now, some of you may be thinking, come on, Dr. Ramani, it happens. What if we're just angry by ourselves and we throw a book on the ground or a bunch of papers because we're angry about something at work? We're not even angry at someone, we're just be angry about a circumstance. Okay. I mean, I think that human behavior tends to fall into that slippery slope metaphor, and I'm being full confession here. I say this as someone who, a few days ago, I threw a pen across my desk when I got really mad about something. I was alone in the room, I had a really bad phone call, I was very angry, and I threw the pen and I started to cry. Nobody else was home. I never expressed the anger during the phone call. No one was there. The cat was, but she was in a different room, so I didn't throw it at her. And I was overwhelmed. We do it, and frankly, I wasn't okay with that. That was not okay. I actually recognized that it was a sign that my stress had gone to a not okay place, and throwing, even when I'm alone, even when I have an angering phone call, it's just not okay. But when it comes to toxic throwing, this is where we're talking about interpersonal behavior. The argument is between two people or more, and the thrower is throwing whatever object they're throwing out of rage or even to humiliate and maintain dominance. The throwing behavior, because it is so dramatic and sometimes even scary, can often silence the other person who may be afraid that things may escalate if they don't just pull back, I should say. And they may have their own trauma response to that level of rage and they may freeze. But this throwing comes up a lot in toxic relationships. And the mistake we make is that we don't view throwing as enough of a problematic behavior when it is happening in a relational space. People get frustrated. I get that. And sometimes, for example, if you're trying to put together IKEA furniture, you might throw the indecipherable instruction manual after banging your hand with a hammer. And if it's not targeted at anyone, I do agree that we do tend to hold space for that response. But within the relational context, it's really not acceptable, especially if there's no accountability or apology or awareness. But that combination of the dysregulated show of rage, the fear it can cause in someone else, and the frequent gaslighting that can occur after these throwing situations is not an uncommon situation in toxic relationships. It's often a manifestation of the dysregulated rage, but it is a cause for concern, obviously, if an object is being thrown at you. That would qualify as physical abuse. But when it is the item being thrown out of rage, not at you, but wherever it's being thrown, it is still a concerning dynamic and should wake you up to sit up a little bit straighter and pay attention. Listen, you got to plan on being gaslighted if you draw attention to it, but it's just not okay. And whatever decision you make about the job you're in with the throwing boss or whatever other relationship where this throwing is happening, be aware that living with this much rage that is bubbling under the surface in the long term is not good for you. I think that we often view throwing things as like, well, people get upset. Again, as the pen thrower this week, while I understand that, had there been someone else there and I was having that argument in real life and throwing that, absolutely unacceptable. It would have made that other person uncomfortable. It would have shown an absolute lack of self-awareness and empathy. And healthy relationships require that kind of accountability. So keep that in mind. And like I said, in most cases, that throwing behavior that happens within the relational context is often happening from a toxic person.
You may wonder, why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons for it. At one level, a narcissist is actually somewhat internally uncomfortable when it's not all about them. So if they're listening to you and you're telling them anything that doesn't have to do with them, they're not going to be that interested. It's a bit like a child's level of attention. What is very interesting is the number of times I have worked with clients who are narcissistic or have narcissistic personality disorder, and they tell me that they have ADHD. And I said, that's interesting. Where do you think that, what do you think that's about? And they'll say, oh yeah, I have a lot of trouble like listening to other people. And I realized what they were calling ADHD is probably this combination of their existing impulsivity and the fact that they can't pay attention to anything unless it's sort of a source of narcissistic supply for them. I don't know if that's ADHD, but it is definitely an inability to pay attention if it doesn't seem to have relevance directly to them. When you're in a relationship with a person and they're not listening to you, it really is an invalidating experience. It's also frustrating because not only do you feel like you're almost staring into a mirror where there's no reflection back, but it can also be very time consuming because you may be telling the narcissist something quite important about an arrangement that was made, about a time that you guys are leaving on a particular vacation, about a bill that needs to be paid. Because everything you say is not important, they don't listen to anything. And that way you might think you shared an important piece of information and they didn't listen, and so they didn't get it, and that might mean an important bill doesn't get paid on time, or they don't take the right days off from work, and then will get quite angry at you afterwards. And that's where the gaslighting can often come in. They'll say, you never said that. Well, you did. And it might very well be, but because they don't listen to anything you're saying, often because they don't value you, they don't bother. There's nothing to listen to, and important information doesn't get passed on. In fact, I often tell people, if you're trying to communicate very important information to a narcissist who does not listen to you, make sure you send it in an email where there's a read receipt required, or some other form of communication where there has to be a formal acknowledgement at a minimum that they received the communication. When the narcissist doesn't listen, and this happens in other spaces, for example, like work, it can be the same level of frustration. First of all, you may feel like you're a completely unvalued member of a work team because nobody is really paying any attention to what you're saying, even though it can be quite valuable. But narcissistic colleagues, by not listening, again, miss the opportunity and information that is being transmitted. Very important information, which can be a real problem in terms of, again, issues in the workplace, important information being disseminated in the workplace in particular. It is absolutely critical. If you have narcissistic supervisor or collaborator or even client that does not listen, you want to make sure that key communications are done in writing and are done in a way that you can track and say, yep, here's the email I sent on such and such a date, and CC other individuals who can ensure that that information gets to the correct place. It's very much a cover your ass kind of mentality, but that's what working with narcissists requires. When you grow up in a family where nobody listens to each other, it can also be very destabilizing. This idea that you're sharing something of your life with a parent and they're completely tuned out can be really upsetting and really problematic for the development, the core development of a sense of self in a young person who often learns of their value in terms of how they interact and the kinds of feedback they get from significant adults in their environment, namely their parents. So having a narcissistic parent can really set a precedent where you start to believe that the things you have to say aren't even worth listening to. Narcissist tendency to not listen probably emanates from a variety of sources, including a lack of empathy, a complete disinterest, a sense of contempt and dismissiveness and disdain they have for people. It's interesting, in many ways, because a narcissist is so insecure and has such a sort of poorly developed sense of self-esteem, or rather sort of variable sense of self-esteem, as it were. Sometimes they, at their most vulnerable moments, actually probably don't think anyone cares that they're listening in the first place. But in general, it's really their contempt and devaluation for other people that can lead them to just not tune in unless they think that piece of information is important for them. And if you're in a relationship with somebody, and of any form, work, family, intimate relationship, with somebody narcissistic, and they're already showing a pattern of contempt towards you, you can all but guarantee that person is not listening to you. It's invalidating, it's dehumanizing, and it's frustrating. And it does mean that you sometimes need to make sure that you cover your own butt by making sure you communicate in ways that get important things done. And sadly, in many narcissistic relationships, you often have to do 2, 3, or 4 times more than other people have to, because it may be that they won't pay that bill on time. That responsibility is going to fall on you. Sucks, but it's the nature of the narcissistic landscape. I mean, everything you think what carelessness is. They say things without thinking. That's careless. They forget to do important things that would matter to other people. That's careless. They may not follow through on deadlines. Careless. Carelessness is just sort of doing without thinking, or not doing when you should be. It's saying without thinking, or not saying the things you should. In its more benign forms, carelessness could be things like not mailing in a thank you note or an RSVP to an important event. That doesn't only happen because a person's narcissistic. It often can happen because people are busy. The reason we often see carelessness manifested in people who are narcissistic, it's because of some of the key patterns we see in narcissism, like lack of empathy, or entitlement, or grandiosity. The sense of, I don't really care, I shouldn't have to care, And really, I think I'm too big to care. And all of that can really make it that a person is careless. And when people do call them out, their hypersensitivity means that they feel like they're being attacked and they'll get defensive. It doesn't mean they'll change their behavior. No matter what kind of relationship you have with a narcissist, whether it's an intimate relationship, family relationship, work relationship, friendship, and the person's careless, it's really uncomfortable. It can be the things that you'll see, like, for example, a friend who chronically flakes on you. There's a real carelessness to that because you may have planned your schedule around that movie night out or that dinner. And when the person thinks nothing of just canceling the plans, there's a carelessness to that. And many people with narcissistic friends will say, yes, it's the flaking that was really a manifestation of the narcissism. And in the case of flakiness, it's just basically just not showing up or canceling at the last minute. Had they canceled earlier, you might have been able to make other plans. So it can really feel like a devaluation of your time. The carelessness of narcissism also means that they underestimate how important things are to you. So for example, you may have some kind of a work event that was very meaningful to you. You might be getting an award or getting your work recognized. And there's a complete carelessness about how important that is to you. And perhaps your partner says, yeah, I can't be bothered to go. They don't become aware of what matters to you. And as a result, may not accord those experiences the kind of meaning that they deserve because they don't ask in the first place. This is a pattern that you don't just see in intimate relationships, but in all kinds of relationships in a family, where people are very careless in the kinds of things they may say. For example, they may be a narcissistic family member, may not be aware at how sensitive a given point is for someone in the family. Like, for example, let's say somebody's having a chronic issue with their weight, and they'll think nothing is saying, hey, getting a little chunky there, or, maybe you need to go a size up, or maybe you need to exercise more. That's a comment that's probably unkind any day of the week, but it's particularly careless if you know that somebody has been struggling with issues related to body image. That's the idea of carelessness. You weren't listening to them in the first place, so you don't understand what their vulnerabilities are. So the narcissist thinks like, well, I don't know, I just said it. How was I supposed to know that that was going to bother them? Well, you should know because you could have asked them. Carelessness reflects an unawareness not only of what other people need, but there's also an unawareness of the impact that the person has on other people. That's a key piece of empathy, a lack of awareness on how you impact other people, but that also manifests in carelessness. This idea that I can do and say what I want, it doesn't really matter, and who really cares? Well, they care when they care. It's as though you're supposed to care what I do, except when I screw it up. And then the narcissist feels like, well, then you shouldn't be so worried about this. I didn't really mean it, and why does it matter anyhow? People who run into careless people in their lives, particularly when those careless people are very narcissistic, feel like this is all embedded in a much bigger pattern of being chronically invalidated. And that, again, goes back to one of the core elements of being in any form of narcissistic relationship, of feeling constantly invalidated, constantly unheard. And this really comes out in the carelessness. There's a beautiful passage that F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote in The Great Gatsby. And he was talking about the two key protagonists in the novel, Tom and Daisy Buchanan, who were two of the most classical narcissists in American literature. And in the novel, he writes, Tom and Daisy were careless creatures, and goes on about how they smash things and make messes of things and just waltz out and leave the messes for other people to clean up. And that's what careless narcissists do. They make messes and they leave other people to clean it up. So a narcissistic partner may go at you, and then it's other friends saying, no, we didn't really mean that. Or your narcissistic mother saying or doing careless things where you're concerned, and your father having to come up with the revisionist story of like, no, she doesn't always think when she speaks. They make messes for other people to clean up. It doesn't feel that good because now you just realize that they've drawn someone else to sort of do their bidding, that narcissists are really good at drawing other people to do their bidding. And you're still left with this narcissistic person who keeps engaging in these careless acts, keeps making messes that other people have to clean up, and that many of us get hurt by. Thanks again for tuning in.